Jon Young's life has been dedicated body and soul to wild nature and to healing the broken relationship between humans and the more than human community of life. He is a genuine intermediary between us two-leggeds and the wingeds, the finned folk, the rooted beings, and the cloven-hooved, antlered, clawed, and furred peoples. He is a world-class tracker, legendary, trained, indeed soaked in a number of indigenous tracking lineages, and his legendary skills at bird language, for those who have spent time with him, don't just seem kind of magical, they are magic. Through his various organizations, Jon has mentored thousands, I mean many thousands of persons, young and old, in the skills of field naturalism, almost single-handedly bringing about a resurgence in what had become an almost lost art as biology moved increasingly indoors and into laboratories and into molecular biology. Jon has, through his teaching, through his various organizations, really rejuvenated the lost and holy art of field biology, field naturalism. But, and he's the author of various books, and co-author of books like Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature, and also What the Robin Knows, which is out there, wonderful book. But he's just as dedicated to cultural regeneration, to the craft of rejuvenating face-to-face and what I call face-to-place culture. He's also uncommonly humble. Please welcome Jon Young.
I think I have to wait for this mic to kick in, or maybe it's already on. Is this one on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. That was, of course, poetic. He makes me sound so much better. I'm going to start with gratitude because, first of all, it's the morning, and second, it's the right thing to do. But there's so much to be thankful for here. And this morning, after days of rewriting my presentation again and again, after each and every one of the presenters who has gone before me, I wanted to make sure that I could contribute to this gathering in the way that I best can. So I want to thank every presenter that has come before me for inspiring and framing this conference in such a special way. I also want to give thanks to Darsha and Jean and everybody who's holding this conference. Thank you for including me, because when Jean reached out to me, I kept ignoring the emails. Mainly because my inbox looks like a river. I don't know if any of you have that, where you have to tell people to fly fish in the pool of your inbox, which is me. But the other thing was that I just didn't feel like I wanted to try to be at an academic conference, because I left academics so long ago and decided to just get on the ground and do this and don't think about it. And if it works, good. If it doesn't, change it, you know. And so I've been sort of on the ground doing this work for so long. Since 1979 is when I began experimenting. So, you know, I told Gene, I said, I just don't know if I belong here. And he said, well, no, you do belong here because you're doing it. You know, you're doing what we're all talking about. We need you here as a practical voice for what's happening. So I want to thank you for that honor, because it made me relax a lot. And then I did just get my PhD friends to help look at everything I was writing. So I want to also thank the Pokagon people here and my dear friends at the Odawa community, because Stacy was here yesterday, and turns out we have a close personal relationship with a peacemaker from Peshabitown, Michigan, who contributed to this presentation I'm giving, Paul Rayfield. So gratitude and greetings to the local people here who hold this land since the beginning of time. and to all the incredible people who stand behind them and for all times. And this is my gratitude gang, and I wish I could put everybody on there that deserves to be on there, but in the upper left are the people, the Naro San people that we're working with now in central Botswana, who are just incredible, incredible people, and who are incredibly invested in this conference. I mean, they're traditional people who don't read or write, and the old man that passed away, Kanama, who's, you can barely see him, but he's there. He's never known anything but the life of his ancestors, and he gets what we're all doing. They've never left the Kalahari, and they're really, you would think, unaware of modern things, but they bump into modern people, and they occasionally get to cousins' houses and see, they like Jackie Chan films a lot. So, they do peek over people's shoulders on Facebook and stuff like that, and they kind of get it, and they're really excited that this kind of conversation is happening, and they want to contribute, and they're now part of a project that we're working on with them, which will not only give them self-determination, but give them a job to be themselves, essentially. But they really stand behind this, the kind of things that are going on at this conference. And the late Jake Swamp, who was a very dear friend and uncle to myself and my family and his wife Judy, and that's my son Aiden, who's also right there. So gratitude to my son Aiden for making the trip down from Toronto to be here today. And there he is with Judy Swamp as a little guy. And these two are from the Akwesasne Mohawk community and part of the Tree of Peace Society, and just incredible consultants to how to build models of peace and how to integrate that into all kinds of settings. So, and then this wonderful elder Ingwe, who I consider the co-founder of the work that we do, who joined me in 1983. And to this beautiful uncle, Gilbert Walking Bull, who adopted me as a nephew many years ago, and we made a mutual commitment, which I carried now since he's passed in 2007, which was that he would help me with my work if I would help his people in this community. And that's a big challenge because there's a lot of trouble going on with the youth on Pine Ridge, and just the teen suicide rate among Indigenous people is really troubling. I don't know if any of you are in touch with that, but it's incredibly troubling. And it is my commitment to figure out how we can do good work for these children, especially on behalf of this elder who's done so much for my family. And this is Paul Rayfield from the Odawa community in Peshabi Town, Northport, Michigan area. And Mike McDonald, also Mohawk man from the Tree of Peace Society. And then my mentor since boyhood is Tom Brown Jr. The reason I am a tracker is because of Tom Brown. And I can tell you right now, the reason that I am doing what I'm doing is because when I was 10 years old, he met me on a street corner, and he adopted me and mentored me in the way that he was mentored since his early boyhood. And that was in the ways of tracking and bird language and survival and all the things that go with that, which we would just call living skills if we were all Indigenous. So this became the foundation for my work. So that's my gratitude, and to all those who I haven't mentioned, I feel I can't really mention everyone, but I really want to acknowledge my grandparents and parents as well, because they did so much for me growing up. So I was the last child in the woods. Richard Liu's book, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder, but I grew up before television had more than 3 channels, so it was time really basically there was limited shows you could watch, so I went in the woods a lot and just played with other children, and there wasn't much of a plan, but it turns out now the research says that all over the world, people who grew up before television or without the influence of television all formed mobs of children of different ages, went in the woods and avoided adults, and took risks and played all day long without supervision, and that this was incredibly important to their evolving neurology, as it turns out, and that nowadays there's almost no children doing that. So in that way, my life was not untypical, but what was interesting was that there was remnants of culture in my family lineage. My grandmother was from Ireland, and my great aunt from Poland, and they both had tricks up their sleeves. And my parents were busy working, and I got babysat a lot by these wonderful grandmothers. And grandmothers have instincts, and grandmothers have tricks. And these tricks and instincts combined with children and woods makes for some meaningful connection. I'll go no further than that, but let's just say the Irish trickster was alive in my grandmother, as was the storyteller. And she really sent me on some amazing errands to go find stuff and bring them back to her. You know, sometimes it was stuff that we could cook and eat, which was my favorite stuff to get, whether it was berries or fish. Sometimes it was frogs that I hadn't caught yet that she found in the field guide that she would say, hey, this one's in our area. Have you seen this one? No. Well, go catch one for me and bring it back. And that could result in weeks of me exploring, you know. But this is the kind of stuff that we need to get back, and quickly. And sharing that bit of remnant of culture idea from the old country of Europe, Gilbert Walking Bull heard me talking about this, and he said, these are the same things my grandmother did with me. She set me on errands. So we'll come back to that. That timeless and self-driven time that we had before media got too strong and before the culture shifted to the point where children no longer connect to nature was a big part of my life growing up. My fishing pole, my hunting. And then when I met Tom Brown on a street corner, I was ready to be mentored. I was really longing for it, and he took me to this whole other level. And this mentoring lineage is truly powerful. And it's super important that we recognize this, what mentoring really is, you know. But I would say that the most formative thing that gets me up here today is witnessing the tide of life receding. And, you know, thank you, Bruce, for your presentation the other day. I don't know where you are, but of course, that was really hard for us to watch, right? And then also, Wazia told me your presentation yesterday. We already know that the tide of life is receding. But in New Jersey in 1970, I was one of the only children who saw the tide of life receding with my own eyes. You know, I'm 10 years old, 11 years old, and I'm noticing snakes disappearing from the habitat, noticing turtles not laying eggs anymore, noticing these things disappearing and trying to get other people concerned, but finding that nobody else is concerned. You know, people who love nature care for nature. And everybody, we all know the importance of the need for the human beings to care for nature. But the truth is that only people who connect to nature will love nature. So if people are not connected to nature, they won't take care of it. It doesn't matter how many laws and regulations or anything else that we try to impose. We need everyone intrinsically to want to take care of Mother Earth. The only way that happens is if you connect them to nature. Nobody really understands what connection to nature means. It's written about, it's talked about, it's on all kinds of websites, it's everywhere in the literature, but when I talk to people about how do you get the result of nature connection predictably, people don't really know. Do you realize that? I asked the question in anthropology in 1979, who are the most connected to nature and how did they get that way? Who in the world is the most connected to nature and how did they get that way? Because this is what we needed to know. Why are some people connected to nature and others simply are not? Well, in my research, it became really obvious that the only people who weren't connected to nature were westernized or affected by some historic trauma. And that historic trauma became integrated as a cultural behavior and passed through time. And then it normalized and it became mainstream behavior. Right? But basically, what we call modernism is essentially just normalized, socially accepted historic trauma. The people who are connected to nature are the people who are still indigenous. But among indigenous around the world, there were people who were incredibly effective at getting all their children connected to nature at a really high level. And then there was traditional cultures that only had a select members of their society that they connected that deeply. So I started to wonder, why do some groups only look to initiate and deeply connect a few people in the community? And Gilbert Walking Bull was explaining how his culture did that. He grew up without school. He grew up without the influences of church. He grew up as a traditional homeschooled indigenous man. And his parents were both healers in the tradition. And so they lived subsistence. But he explained to me, he said, in our culture, every generation, we have to look for a certain number of people who we're going to initiate in holding and understanding how to regenerate the culture. And these children are raised very close to the earth, and they're raised close to nature. And when they get to a certain age, then we start initiating them in ceremony and ritual, and they begin to hold the culture as they get to be elderlies. And then in other cultures, it was apparent that the goal and the mandate of the culture was that every child had to be super deeply connected to nature. And you know what I noticed was there was a high correlation between really difficult places to live and everyone needing to be initiated. So the San Bushmen live in a really difficult place to live. Really difficult place to live. There are so many ways to die in that part of the world. It's just unbelievable. So I think that if you don't raise your children super connected to nature in a place where so many different things want to eat you and there's so many ways to die, then you're basically dooming your children. So this was their educational model. You know, connect them deeply, and then they'll take care of themselves. So what's this teaching us, and how can it help us, and how can this help us to help others? And this is a series of questions that were driven on me by Tom Brown since I was a boy, but also I noticed that Paul Raphael's elders among the Anishinaabe also use these same three questions. How can we help? How can this help me? How can this help me to help others? You know, these are mentoring questions. So I did research, and I just started compiling all these things, and I'm like, okay, these San Bushmen have this reputation that they are the best trackers in Africa, and all their children are amazingly connected to nature. What are they doing that the Apaches are also doing, that the Lakotas are doing, that even the Hawaiians are doing, and that the ancient stories of Ireland were saying we used to do? And what are we not doing anymore that's related to that? Because maybe there's a clue there, you know? So I discovered something, for instance, like a greeting custom. And I said, okay, greeting customs. In New Jersey, we have greeting customs. Hey, what's up? Hey, how you doing? How you doing? That's a greeting custom, right? Well, when you get among the San Bushmen and you do a greeting custom, you know, there's 3 or 4 of us, and we're going to visit with them, and we're going to go gather roots. Well, for 45 minutes, we have to greet each other. And the greeting is really long, and, you know, they're holding my hand, I'm holding their hand, and they're talking to me in their language, and I don't understand anything they're saying. I'm talking to them in my language at the same time, because that's what you do. And you smile, you look in each other's eyes, and all this love starts to flow back and forth, you know, and then when you're all done, then you go to the next person, and you repeat that, and everybody's greeting everyone, and it takes like 45 minutes. And then we go out for 2 hours and we gather roots, and then it gets really hot, so we all go take a siesta. And then when we come back, we have to greet them all over again. Another 45 minutes to go out and gather for an hour or 2. And the more I looked around, the more I realized, well, these greeting customs are pretty important among these indigenous people who raise incredibly connected people. So why don't I integrate a greeting custom with this all-boys Catholic academy in New Jersey in 1983? I start taking these boys every day after school, and we just do stuff. But I decided to integrate a greeting custom just to see what would happen. And so I looked at what are the effective elements of a greeting custom, and I challenged these young men, please come up with a greeting custom. And the goal is that, you know, you feel seen, you feel welcomed, you feel invited, and that now you're here and you're ready to do the day's work. You guys come up with that. So they made it up, and it ended up being sitting and each person taking turns, just saying something they loved during the day at school today, something they're thankful for, and something that challenged them, and what they want to do today. And their goal, they all had to listen to each other and not think about what they were going to be saying the whole time the person before them went, that they would really be present, and, you know, and this is what they did. 3 months into it, one of the young men began to cry when it was his turn for greeting customs. Now, this is basically the Notre Dame of New Jersey, because a lot of the young men that come out of Christian Brothers All-Boys Catholic Academy are on, did you go to this school? Oh, that's so funny. They're on their way to schools like Notre Dame. I mean, they're definitely top of the list kids in this area. And so they're not going to cry. They're not going to show emotion. You know, they're big athletics, sports, you know, competitive young men. But here they're all crying. And I said, when I looked up and realized that Ken was crying and the tears were running down his cheeks, all the other boys were already crying, and he hadn't even said anything yet. So pay attention to that. All of them were crying, and Ken hadn't even spoken, and he was the reason why everyone was crying, but he hadn't moved his lips. but the tears were already flowing. My eyes too. And Ken said, I'm the number one student in my school, which was true in his class. He was number one. He said, I go to one of the best schools in the state, maybe the country. I come from one of the best families, I'm told. And he said, you are the only people who let me be me and accept me for who I am. I love you guys so much. I love what we do here. I will give the rest of my life to this, he said. Then I began to understand there's a reason for greeting customs. I didn't understand it at first. Now I get it. It's outside of what we experience in educational modeling, outside of what we experience in sports and recreation and fitness modeling. We all understand those models very well. We spend trillions of dollars on them every year. I don't know what the budget would be for recreational fitness well-being research at Notre Dame to support their athletes, and how much we spend on understanding how to do education well. Neither of those fields need money right now or support, right? How much do we spend on connection modeling in our country? When was the last time you had a good greeting custom? That'll answer the question. Well, I began to discover the hidden magic of this. And this young man here, who is responsible for the starting of this club at Christian Brothers Academy, had this amazing series of synchronicities or serendipities with river otters due to what I was doing with him and what Ingwe was doing with him, which was basically allowing him to fully integrate into his sensory capacity and just let him be who he was. Same things that Tom Brown did for me as a boy. And the spiritual nature of these experiences this boy was having with the otter caused the principals at Christian Brothers Academy to come in for an administrative hearing, because it was being reported that I was teaching them to be animists, right? And the urban priest who was working there at the time was sending a lynch mob after me to put an end to this, but the brothers stepped up and said, no, he's doing exactly what Jesus advocates. There's nothing wrong with what this man's doing. He's not teaching them anything. It's the creation that's teaching them, and who made the creation. And this is from the Brothers of the Christian Order, And so that program lived for 12 years at Christian Brothers before I moved to Washington State. But it was incredibly powerful, and it began to inform a lot of things, including youth at risk and other high schools and homeschool programs. And pretty soon I was working for adjudicated youth. I was working for younger siblings of drug and alcohol addicted families in the inner city. And we were having successes everywhere, and we had people coming from all over the place to find out why our children were improving when the psychologists were saying they couldn't, right? We always got the kids that no one else wanted to get. We always got the last chance kids. This is their last chance. Put them in the woods with the people that smell like smoke. At least they won't get any. They'll come home dirty, but at least they'll be happy. But those kids always recovered and ended up going to become leaders in their field. And they kept telling us we were getting lucky. Lucky. That's Ingwe. This guy was a power hitter. When he was a boy, his family moved to, well, I'm going to say it the way he says it, because everyone says it's Kenya. He says, don't you bloody tell me how to say Kenya. I've grown up there. I helped found the country. He was a tough old guy. But his only playmates growing up were Bushmen and Akamba boys, because he was initiated as an Akamba youth and raised among the Akamba because his family there was no other British family for 28 miles. And he saw Nairobi when it was still wooden buildings at the end of the train tracks. So he saw Africa before it was completely destroyed ecologically. And he was initiated in his youth as a ritual leader and guide for youth. And he was an absolutely vicious cultural consultant, and did so much for so many, saved many lives until he passed at the age of 93 in 2005. And this is a Chiricahua Apache medicine woman named Helen, who was greatly supportive of our work in Washington State. And we had some extraordinary experiences together. The Origins Project is what we're working on with the Bushmen, but it asks the question, you know, how do we optimize connection through, essentially, I think you called it evolutionary potential or whatever it was. You were talking about the epigenetic evolutionary potential. I work with occupational therapists nowadays a lot because the kids are having a terrible time. 1 in 29 children is suffering from a sensory process disorder right now. All across the US, in Silicon Valley, 1 in 10 children. The suicide rate is linked directly to this kind of influence. Our children are in deep trouble. And we can turn it around very quickly through nature connection, but we need to understand what nature connection is and how it works in order for it to be effective, period. It does not respond to educational modeling. It does not respond to recreational modeling. It responds to connection modeling, which is all but forgotten in the Western world. Remember why? Because when the conquest happened to an ancestral culture, it was the goal of the conquerors to destroy the connective cultural elements, to weaken the people and to break the culture so it wouldn't work anymore. And from that point on, disconnection occurs in every succeeding generation. That's why Westerners don't understand connection, because the founding mission was to destroy connection. You saw the neurobiological basis yesterday for why it matters, that 0 to 3 period. That's connection modeling. Everything you described, Darsha, is exactly what connection modeling is. There are connection modeling indicators for every age and stage of life, pre-birth to post-death. I mean, literally, the way they mentor young men and young women before they marry and conceive is as much a part of connection mentoring as what happens to them when they're, you know, a living child walking on the earth. But there are rites of passage and thresholds for every age and stage of life that enhance connection at every stage of the journey. And this is all forgotten. It's lost. But we've been gathering and gathering and gathering and collaborating with indigenous elders all over the world to make sure that we've got the map complete. And now they're taking that map and going back into their communities and saying, what's missing? Which has been really helpful, you know? And they're putting stuff back that's been taken. The original need, you know, this is my friend Du. He's an initiated hunter among the Naro people there. And he basically, his good friend and uncle of mine that passed away, Hanama, he basically told this beautiful story, and it ties everything together so nicely. He said, a long time ago, the lions ate a lot of us. This is what he tells the little children, all at the fire. And the children's eyes get really big. And then he repeats, they ate a lot of us. And he says it with this love, and his hands are like this, and he's got this big smile. And then he kind of giggles to himself, and he walks away, you know, and the children are all sitting at the fire like frozen. A couple nights later, the fire's gone, the kids are sitting around the fire. The old man walks up, tells the exact same story. A long time ago, the lions ate a lot of us. Big smile, all this love. They ate a lot of us. No need for Hollywood special effects or creepy sounds or, you know what I mean? That's why we're fascinated with horror films. That's why Hollywood makes money off of horror films, because we have this driving instinct to understand what can kill us. It's neurologically hardwired into us. This is where we all come from. These are our ancestors. All the human genetic mapping says humans all kind of came out from those people. They're still alive. They're still here. You can visit them and see them and realize this is what we all did for 2 million years before we did other stuff. There's a lot of information in that about how our neurology is designed. Do you get that? We're hardwired to be aware. We're hardwired to be connected. Why don't they get eaten by lions? They don't helicopter parent their children. And their children are running around and playing, and there's lion tracks. 19 African lions walking through the sand, leaving tracks. They don't have guns. They don't have hard chain link fences. They don't have hard-walled buildings. They sleep on the open ground. Hyenas eat people. Lions eat people. Leopards eat people. Poisonous snakes, 9 species that can kill you in 20 minutes, are all over the place while you're gathering roots and bush seeds and berries. They don't try to control their children at all. What is that? If anyone had a reason to keep their kid indoors, you get it? Yeah. They're not afraid at all. The lions don't eat the bushmen. Why? Why don't they get bit by poisonous snakes? Think about it.
They pay attention.
They pay attention, and they have treaties with every single creature. They have conversations and treaties with every creature. They have agreements with the lions. You get the water hole at night, but it's ours during the day. And the government gives them cattle so that they can, grow up and join the real world. And the bushmen let the lions eat their cattle, and the government comes and says, no, you have to go kill those lions. They killed your cattle. The bushmen are like, we can't kill the cattle. We steal meat from the lions. If they have the right to steal meat from us. The night belongs to them. If they take a lion during the night, we can't do anything about that. That's the deal we have with the lions. We're not going to hurt the lions, period. It's extraordinary. This is our ancestry. What happened to us? We're all this. Where did we go? Where did it go? How come our neurology is so changed? We can put this right back again. And you know what's really interesting? I'm working with the National Audubon Society right now because songbirds broadcast where their lion is through their body language, through their eye contact, through their vocalizations, and our mirror neurons can respond to it. We can get the same connection benefit from songbirds' fear of Cooper's hawks in Indiana that we can get from the lions in Botswana. However, of course, the lions will get you there a little quicker. Because when you're walking among lions and you see those tracks for the first time, you have a nightmare that night of epic proportions. You know what I mean? Your neurology's like, pay attention! Right? And you're just like, holy mackerel, I don't even need to meditate. Haven't had a thought in an hour. You can't think there. You can't think and listen at the same time. You get it? Your hard wiring kicks in. We can't bring African lions to Indiana. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea, but we can tune people into the language of nature, and that activates connection at a high level very quickly. It's the most efficient thing I've seen in 36 years of doing this, bird language. So I'm cooperating with National Audubon right now, and we're dropping bird language units in different communities around the country and studying the results, and it's been amazing. We're getting somewhere. We're turning the tide of nature deficit disorder in a model that is predictable and efficient. And where did this come from? Right here. It's how he grew up. It's how all the children there grow up. And it's exactly linked to everything that Darsha just told us yesterday. This is super important stuff for all of us. I had to figure out what was unique about what I was doing. And I realized I was trying to do this through education and vocational modeling because I was a teacher, I was a trained teacher, and I worked at a high school. But I started to realize that what we were actually doing that moved the nature connection needle was from this quadrant, a whole bunch of different activity sets, such as greeting customs. So we started to gather the things that were unique among indigenous hunter-gatherers that produced amazing trackers, that they all shared in common as long as it was used for peaceful purposes. If it was used for warfare, we didn't work with it. And then we gathered these things and we began to look for the ergonomic application, and we allowed people to use sort of crowdsourcing to come up with their own way to solve that problem. And it actually worked incredibly well. But it started to work side by side very effectively with both vocational and educational modeling and fitness and recreation. And what I'm saying is that our connected children were better at sports than their peers. The connected children were better at academics than their peers. They were better students, they were more focused, they were more creative, they were more self-driven, right? So connection modeling is not even at odds with the things that we hold dear. It's an enhancement. Phil Jackson himself, Chicago Bulls coach for 5 years, used a lot of connection modeling with his team, the Chicago Bulls, to get them to another level of athleticism. So this stuff is known to be effective. It's just not being embraced by the mainstream. It's not being embraced in families. And we have to figure that out. It's big. Cultural modeling when you put these three things together and it becomes intentional, as it is in a culture like the Bushmen, you get something I call deep nature connection. And deep nature connection is measured, the metrics of deep nature connection, are these attributes of connection. We use certain metrics to measure effectiveness in education. We use other metrics to measure effectiveness in fitness, correct? People try to correlate those metrics with connection, but we need different metrics for connection. Because connection is a different part of our nervous system, a different part of the human organism, and it requires different kinds of strategies and support. The first, and I'm going to say the most important, I'm going to go right around the wheel of these attributes and explain them to you briefly. But a quiet mind related to sensory integration is the #1 attribute that we have to pay attention to. This is what bird language does, okay? It awakens people's senses, connects their ears to the 4 directions. Do you know how profound you are as a human being, what you can do with your ears? Have you ever been really annoyed by people when you're trying to talk to somebody and someone comes next to you and starts talking at the same time to the same person? Doesn't that just annoy you? But it happens, right? People get excited and then they start talking over each other, and then people get mad and they look at each other. Well, when I'm with the San Bushmen, I was doing this research on bird language among the San, and I have 5 Bushman mothers standing in front of me and 19 Bushman children running around at their feet. And the translator standing next to me, and the doctoral researcher, Nicole Appelian, is standing next to me. And I'm asking pointed questions of these women about their knowledge of bird language and how they work with their children with it. And all 5 of them are answering me at the same time. All 5 of them are answering me at the same time. And they're not looking at each other mad because, my sister or my friend is talking over me at the same time. They're all just talking at once. All 5 of them. And the translator, to my amazement, is standing there in wide-angle peripheral vision engaged, listening, nodding, and when they're all done talking, then he says, "They are saying," and he begins to say what all 5 women said, one by one. You can do that. Why can they do that and we don't do that anymore? Because they have to listen to all sounds in their landscape constantly in order to stay alive. And they've had to do it since childhood. So to them, 5 people talking at once is no different than 12 birds singing at once. Or a bird alarm over here, a song over here, and they can integrate 3-dimensional spatial understanding of the significance of that information. So 5 women talking at once is easy for them. Think about that. You are all those people. You are hardwired to have that kind of sensory power. We don't use it anymore. We don't even know what it can do. We've long lost an understanding of that. But bird language will get you to the core attribute. If you pull off this attribute first, which is the quiet mind, and it's related to sensory integration, okay? It's not mindfulness. Mindfulness can be practiced without sensory integration. But if you take mindfulness and add sensory integration, you'll understand the quiet mind. So you could say mindfulness is a subset of the quiet mind. And you can also say that if you got the quiet mind, you're definitely going to be mindful. And it has nothing to do with enlightenment. The Bushmen don't consider themselves enlightened, and they don't care about that kind of stuff. This is necessary for survival. This is what they need to stay alive. And we are hardwired for it. But it's not tied to some higher sort of lofty thing. Right? If you have it, you will stay alive. We can do this. It's actually really easy and it's fun. So the second thing is childlike happiness. Anyone who goes out and plays outside for a little while with other children, when they come back in, their cheeks are red, their eyes are sparkling, and they're just happy. And when they come in, like when the dog's really happy and it's all happy to see you, it makes you happy. This is infusive happiness. And this is one of the metrics of connection. People are happy when they're connected. Go for connection, you will get happiness. Vitality and an abundance of electricity in the body. What does that look like? Right? When I'm talking to the Bushmen, they're always doing this with their hands. They can't tell a story without going like that. They're constantly dancing. Their eyes, their hands, this like this. my little daughter Willis, there were some kittens that were going to be born, and she couldn't wait to see them. And then she hears that they're born, but she's not allowed to see them yet because their eyes are closed. And she's bursting to see these kittens, okay? So I guess she's about 7 years old. So we get over to the day when she's invited to see the kittens. Well, the kitten's eyes open today. You know, she runs over there, right? So she goes and she looks in the box. There's all these kids crowded around the box. And she goes like this. And she looks in there and her eyes go. And then she goes. That's abundance of electricity in the body. You know, how many of you would like a little of that? You know, you keep going back to that coffee machine and it just doesn't get you there. You think it's gonna, and it doesn't. But you want that energy in your body, right? Connection gives you that energy in your body. This is why it increases athleticism, right? You're a better performer, a better musician, better athlete. And you can get out of the way of cobras really quickly. I discovered in the Kalahari through this. And just so you know how the Bushmen actually generate this in their community, I'm walking with Cacao through the Kalahari after a long day of tracking, and the translator is walking behind me, Nyoki, and she says, "Hey John, Cacao just said snake, look out." So, curious naturalist that I am, I look to my right, and you know, Cacao's hand is out and he's pointing, and I see this beautiful yellow snake coming through, right? About 9 feet long, gorgeous. And it's got round eyes and a narrow neck and a narrow head. I'm like, okay, it's not poisonous. And I bend down to look at it, and it comes up, and its hood spreads, and I'm like, ah! I'm not in Jersey anymore, you know? So I screamed at this high-pitched level, and I flew backwards through the air like did Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragons, and I landed about this far away on my butt in the sand. And I didn't know the Bushmen noticed. That night at the fire, they imitated that over and over and over and over. The next morning, all these Bushmen who I didn't meet yet came, and they're all rubbing their eyes, all tired, but they're looking to see who's the guy, you know, who's the one, you know, they want to see. So they use humor and they use imitation, they use their whole body to tell stories, right? This is critical to awakening connection. Totally critical. So the capacity to catch others' stories. This is really missing in modern times. I've done all the social research. You know, so I meet a lot of people right now who haven't had their stories caught in a sincere way in decades. When I talk to the Bushmen, they grow up with at least 25 to 35 trustworthy story catchers around them at any point, and they tell their story in a sincere way to somebody 2 to 3 times a day. I think that's what we're hardwired for. I think that's what we're hardwired for. That's the recommended daily allowance for story catching. We don't have it anymore. It's gone. This is one of the hugest, most important things that we could put back in our communities right now, in our families right now. Listening to each other's stories unconditionally. Not giving advice, not interrupting and telling our story on top of their story, but listening deeply to other stories without thought. This is so nourishing for the connection system in a human being. It's required. You need it. It builds empathy and connection, of course. If we have empathy and connection, then we want to care for everything, right? If we have empathy and connection with nature, then we are conservationists. We are going to take care of the earth. We're going to take care of it for future generations. We're going to be trustees. That's where it comes from. This causes that helpfulness. We actually want to help. We want to take care of each other. We want to take care of the future. It's intrinsic. Everything we talked about already. We live fully with an awareness of the sacredness of life. We appreciate the mystery. And we awaken love and compassion. And forgiveness also comes easier because of connection. These things are all really needed in the world right now. These 8 attributes that I just went through, if you imagined everyone in your neighborhood having them, how would your neighborhood feel to live in? You may not think, oh, I don't think I can have those attributes for me. Well, then forget about you. Take care of your neighbors and get them the attributes. How cool would your neighborhood be? I'd never move from a neighborhood if my neighbors had those attributes. I discovered that those 8 attributes are present in all the San people from birth till death. They never have a lapse in the attributes. I thought teen years would be a natural place where the attributes would lapse and then come back later when people were empowered with their life purpose. But their teens have the attributes. And when I saw that, I knew we had the cure for teen suicide. Right there. And I'm not saying it's easy to administer. The problem with connection modeling is that it requires certain strategies, and Western society rejects most of them. Rejects most of them as valueless. We can solve the problem because we know how to. The mechanics are simple. The task is not easy. But we have over 400 projects globally right now that are applying this effectively and getting the same results. All over the world right now. Multiple cultures, India, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Costa Rica, all over the US and Canada, all the German-speaking countries, Switzerland, Sweden, I meant to say, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Ireland is kicking in now. The UK is getting going. And we recently got Poland. It migrated across the Oder River, so it's entering Eastern Europe. And it's working. And we're working with indigenous communities all over the world and giving them back this information so they can use it to self-analyze their communities to see what pieces are missing. And I have a great relationship with the Hawaiians and Anahola and the Kanui Kapono Charter School, which is applying all this stuff there very effectively, getting amazing results. This stuff works. It's ancient knowledge, and it works, and it will work for you as it has for all times. Well, remember, connection modeling has its own rules. Just because we want it to look a certain way doesn't mean it will. You get what I'm saying? If you grew up with 12, 15 years of educational modeling and you are unconsciously competent in that, you're going to default to that. And it's not going to create connection outcomes. Okay? Western society is born from disconnection. The result of that is unconscious incompetence in our entire global community. If we acknowledge unconscious incompetence in something that we really need to become competent in quickly, that's a good starting point. I'm basically saying we don't know what we're doing. The Bushmen also don't know what they're doing. But the difference is they have unconscious competence. You get what I mean? I ask them why they do that with their children. They're like, because my grandmother used to do that. Because that was amazing what you just did. That was super connective for that child. Yes, it was. Why did you do that? My grandmother used to do that. They don't know that they're doing that for connection. They're just doing what was done for them. The problem with culture is it passes in the unconscious realm, not the conscious realm. We can't use our rational mind to drive this equation. We need other strategies. Okay? The Forest Kindergarten story that was told yesterday was exciting, and I agree. And now Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature, which is a book that our organization created out of this work, is required in Germany for forest kindergarten teachers. Why? Because a study was done. Here's a forest kindergarten teacher. Here's the students that they are influencing. This is group A. Group B, different teacher, different group. Okay? And I'm really summarizing this. This went on with multiple schools all across Germany. In group A, all the children are not connected to nature after their years at forest kindergarten. In group B, all of the children are. Where is the problem? Where's the problem? It's not the forest kindergarten model, it's the teacher. So they looked into it and they discovered that teacher A was not connected to nature. Teacher B was. And what that suddenly pointed out was that connection modeling moves more from role modeling than from pedagogy. Teacher A and B had high letter grades in college. They both graduated with high marks, and they were considered competent and professional and caring, well-meaning people. They were not incompetent. Do you understand? But the children were the proof was in the pudding. The ones who came from a disconnected adult were disconnected as children because connection modeling is operating below the level of consciousness. It's not part of your rational toolbox. You with me on that? That's pretty significant. If we know that, we can do something different to get the results we're looking for. That's super important. okay? Educational modeling and connection modeling are good dance partners, but they are not the same. All right, so we gathered all these things, and it was kind of like having all these great little toys and tools, but they got in a huge pile in the garage, and then you throw them in a refrigerator box to keep them from getting dusty. And you have to keep reaching in the box and pulling out the tools, but you keep ending up using the ones on the top, and you forget about the ones in the bottom. You with me? And that's kind of what happened with our research, because we gathered over 1,000 different elements and tools that we were testing and using, and it got very confusing. So we had to create a model. And Ingwe himself said, don't use bloody Roman numerals to make your organization of your curriculum. It's the Romans who caused this in the first place. He said, all indigenous cultures use the 4 directions as an organizational system. We should do the same. So we didn't. We deliberately based it on the XYZ axis for spatial dimension, and then the Hawaiians from Anahola contributed past, present, future for northwest, center, southeast. So we have 8 categories. In each category are tools that result in the attribute that goes to that category. So to make it easier for people, you want the northeast attribute, you want the quiet mind, use the northeast tools. Bird language is a northeast tool. It's not tied to a cultural lineage. Are you with me? Not tied to a cultural lineage. We're not borrowing a medicine wheel from a culture. We're literally using XYZ axis. Top of the map is north. Bottom is south. We're using things that modern people bump into, modern people know. And it's pretty universal because we all learned it. So it's the framing behind it. We let the children tell us the attributes of each of the directions, and they came up with things that then eventually developed what we would just call attributes for each of the directions, okay? And it's just primary observations of nature. It's nothing deep and philosophical, just primary observations of nature. We began to work with Jake and Judy Swamp and Mike McDonald from the Tree of Peace Society. They really liked the depth of connection we were getting with our children to nature, and they were like, can we please bring this model to Akwesasne, because we'd really like the Mohawk children to get the benefit of this, and I'm like, happy to help you. They began teaching us peacemaking modeling to put that right into the center of our model, so each of the axes of our storage unit is linked to a peacemaking outcome as a community development strategy. So I know this is getting complicated. I'm going to go through it really quickly. But I want you to know that connection modeling needs to be supported differently. And this is how we do it. Okay? So remember, you will not connect unless you feel safe. If you're running a program for connection and the kids don't feel safe on all levels, especially deep inside spiritually, they're not going to connect. They're going to stay hidden and locked down. They're too used to disconnected programming. Modern society is not set up for connection. So we have strands on each of the 8 shields. We have, this is what the 8 shields model looks like if you just look at strands. And if you just take one of the strands, that's the northwest strand on every one. You know, that's a reference to what those strands represent. And each strand has a different archetypal value. Each shield has a different archetypal value. So it's like fractal, and that way you only have to learn 8 things, and they just keep repeating over and over again. And that makes it easy for us to teach lots of people in lots of places at the same time. We discovered that all indigenous communities had a day cycle and a night cycle. They had a nature connection component and a people connection component that were equally weighted. And we discovered that the people in the Western tradition who are allegedly nature connected are actually sociopathic naturalists. Most of them got to be nature connected because they hated people because of a bad experience in the modern world, and they fled to nature for safety. Then they came back as nature writers. Sorry, David. David doesn't fall in that category. David and I know each other well. We've talked about this. The Western tradition is filled with people who have fled society to talk about nature. Indigenous tradition, everyone talks about nature, and everyone's connected to each other. You cannot do nature connection without people connection. People will only go as far in their nature connection as their peer group will support. Did you hear that? We suddenly had a problem on our hands. We actually had to start mentoring people in people connection. We couldn't ignore it anymore. So we had to do all kinds of stuff with that. And that was not something I was excited about because I was a sociopathic naturalist. And I wanted to stay that way. And there's also rings. You know, at the outside of the 8 shields diagram is beginners. In the center is the elders. So you could say birth is on the outside, death is on the inside, ancestors is on the inside. And this would be like the 90-year-olds. This would be the babies. And these are stages of life, and these are rites of passage. So the model gets complicated, but at least it allows us to know what tools to use for which groups at which age-appropriate levels, and what needs to be trained for parents, what needs to be trained for grandparents, and so on. And that's how this whole thing is set up. Each of the senses is attended to in each of the directions, and so on. And it just goes like that. But now you see that each of the 8 shields is set up to achieve a particular outcome in terms of the attributes of connection. So for the University of Vermont, they wanted to know, could we get people to the 8 attributes from modern life in 2 years through an online degree program? And I had to ask the question, have we ever gotten a modern adult to the 8 attributes in 2 years? Because that was the first question. Did it even ever happen? You know, because kids, it's easy. Kids come with the attributes. You just have to hit the button and they go right back. It's the adults that are the problem. It's not the kids. Heads up. So we ended up working with this group of people from our movement, and we did this research, and we found 125 people who had gotten to the 8 attributes in modern times from modern lifestyles. And 25 of them had gotten there, or 28 of them had gotten there within 2 years. And then we asked, what do they all have in common? And we figured this was the shortest and most efficient journey. You know, being that we don't have any other case studies, we used that as a case study. And what we ended up with was they all had deep nature connection core routines. They were all consciously competent in the art of mentoring. They had effective grieving routines. And they were exposed to transformative leadership role models who had the attributes. Coyote's Guide has all the core routines of nature connection in it. It's a very effective book. It was tested on over 100 different groups. And anything that worked for people who weren't us, we would put it in the book. Because then we knew that anyone could use it. It's now in German as well, and it's going to be in Chinese soon, Mandarin. These are core routines for nature connection, things that need to be done every day in a regular way. In Western education, it's kind of like, I did that subject, it's time to move on. In nature connection, you have to revisit the same stuff over and over again and continually go deeper. Modern people don't like that, but they do, because it's very healing. But we use the sit spot, meaning go out and sit somewhere still and watch and observe and listen. Come back and tell the story of the day to somebody, and if you can't, tell it to your journal. Practice timelessness, because time sensitivity makes disconnection really powerful. Wander without a sense of destination. Let your body pull you to places. Do a lot of mapping, both verbally and using pictures, so that your brain develops a certain level of interconnectedness with the landscape. Learn bird language. Learn to be a great storyteller. Expand your storytelling capability to bring all your senses into your experience-scape. I really like that. You know, the storyteller's mind is what I've been calling it. When the San Bushmen tell stories, they use all their senses. Practice gratitude daily, constantly. Use sensory expansion. There's more core routines, but that's kind of what's on in Coyote's Guide. Paul Rayfield from the Odawa community basically said, you know, a healthy culture welcomes newborns, has rites of passage from training for adulthood in nature, initiates youth into adulthood, helps them search for personal vision in their 20s. They go into deeper service in their 30s and 40s. They become real leaders in their 50s, elders in their 60s, and spiritual advisors when they're older than that. But in modern times, when they don't get that, they feel neglected without welcoming. They feel angry if they don't get the rite of passage. They feel isolated if they don't get initiated as adults. They feel hopeless without vision. And when you look at this right here, you're looking at modern adults. It's just like, bam, there it is. And this is why people need to grieve. Because when modern adults reconnect, they start to realize they didn't get what they needed, and they start to long for it, and they start to grieve. And you have to help them grieve. They have to birth the grief so they can move forward and be more connected. In a healthy culture, grieving customs are available to everyone every day. Some people have never grieved in modern times. They don't even know what it is. When you're with the Bushmen, they have 4 to 7 grieving ceremonies a week. They're grieving constantly and laughing constantly. They're some of the happiest people I've ever met. We need to process grief, and we don't have avenues today. So we can layer this, we can teach the skills at different levels in communities, and we can get cooperation between different groups. Like now we can rebuild communities knowing that artists, musicians, and elders can be spiritual advisors and contribute. We know that parents with babies can be involved. We know that parents with young kids in programs and mentors. So we now have an organizational chart to sort communities and give people roles, and we can train them in different meaningful tracks. And the result is, that we are figuring this out. These different tracks can be separated and trained out. You can then train them all in one community like we just did in British Columbia, and all of a sudden, bam, you have 144 people show up for an art of mentoring, and it feels like an authentic village in one day. And some of these people have never met each other. It's all ergonomic, it's all neurological, it's all bio-neurological based. It's not philosophical, it's just fun. People have so much fun, it makes Burning Man look, shameful. Art of mentoring is an incredible model. It's working, and it's ancestral, and it's powerful, and our bodies respond instantly, and it can be trained all over the world. But we need strategies to regenerate nature connection. We need them. It just doesn't happen by itself. We actually have to pay attention to the educational layer, the outdoor rec layer, the nature connection thing that happens all by itself because of neurology. And we have to train leaders in deep nature connection so they can become those eagles, those role models to help get that tree of life healthy again. This is doable. We're doing it. There's hundreds of communities around the world, tens of thousands of children that I'm meeting. As I travel, I meet these children who are growing up in these models, and my heart is full. They're the reason I live. You with me on that? I see a lot of scary children that I'm really worried about. But I see these little shining lights all over the world where I go. And they're all coming from modeling like this. We can do this. We can scale this, and we will. But I don't know if it's going to overcome what Bruce was telling us about in enough time, because people are very resistant to change. Very resistant to change. Super scary. So I only work with early adopters who are ready to be stakeholders and walk forward with trust. And because of that, we have a very eclectic, wonderful community of crazy leaders around the world. It's really fun to work with them. So these are some of the projects we're working on right now. A media project with the Bushmen to preserve all these techniques of nature connection that they're so good at as a parenting support thing. Village Builders is where we train community stakeholders in different regions to, and the Leadership Initiation Project to help them learn the advanced techniques of connection, art of mentoring leadership, connection facilitators, nature connection projects, bird language leaders with the National Audubon Society. And that's what I'm doing. Yeah. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, I might be able to pick one, right? Or something like that, because I know I went a little over there. But one? I am going to be around for the next day, too. So.
Can you say something about the grieving processes, since we all need some of that?
Yeah. OK, so here's a problem. This is a bottleneck. The 28 people that got there in 2 years, they had 2 people in common. 25 of them came from Gilbert Walking Bull. 8 of them came from Paul Rayfield. And there was an overlap. Some had both Paul and Gilbert. Both of these guys are traditional healers. Both of them know how to heal grief through traditional healing ceremonies and rituals. Big problem. You can't borrow traditional healers from really taxed traditional communities to help everybody else. They got their hands full. Big problem. We need grieving practitioners who understand connection-based grieving. And you know what's cool is somatic experiencing is kicking in, and all these various deep trauma somatic healing techniques are starting to show up at the party, and they're actually really effective. We do need grief healing specialists in a way that we've never needed them before on our planet. We need them. Every community needs them redundantly. In traditional Hawaiian society, every family is responsible for having people who know how to do this. Every family. So if Auntie dies and she was your Ho'oponopono person in the family, you can borrow somebody from another family for a little while, but now what are you doing to that family? Right? Your family has grief attendant needs every day. You can't borrow the neighbor across the street. She's got her own family to deal with, or he's got his own family to deal with. So they borrow and train really quickly so that every family is responsible for its own grief. That's what you need to understand about grief. It's not something we do because somebody dies in our life once. It's something that we might need every day. And the Bushmen are aware of this, and they have the trance healing ceremony 4 out of 7 nights on average. That's a lot of grieving ceremonies. They're crying and laughing at the same time. And they're imitating animals, and they're getting all crazy around the fire. And the trance healers are all shaking, and they're coming over to you, and they're pulling out the nails from your body, and they're turning the nails into steam through their head. And you feel more love and open after those trance healing things than you can imagine. Right? We don't have anything like that. Those are our ancestors. We all used to do that. You know, we got to get that back. And I don't have the Leadership Initiation Project is trying to tackle that, but that's a big job. We're basically trying to heal thousands of years of historic trauma. You know? Jake Swamp, I'm going to end with this, okay? Jake Swamp said, you know, hey, this work is taking root, he said. He got this big smile on his face, and they're like, yeah. He said, you know, you guys, it's going to take about 200 years. We all went like that. He said, but you know, it's important that you know that it's going to take 200 years, because then you start thinking of yourselves as foundation builders instead of roofers. You guys all want to finish the roof and move in tomorrow, he said. There is no village. You want it now. You want your longhouse complete. He said, but you're not going to get that maybe in your lifetime. But do you want your children to have that? Do you want their children to have it? Think 7 generations into the future, he said. If that's your job, to rebuild that beautiful place for us to all dwell together, and you're the foundation builders, what do foundation builders need to do? You know, so that's who we are, our generation. You know, we're building the foundation for the future, because there's nothing here to pass on. You know, there's a lot of fragments and remnants. You know, we've got to put the pieces back together. So, thank you. Anthony.
Where'd you get that great shirt at?
Yeah, hey, Anthony's got some great shirts. What do you think? All right, thank you very much.